How many English tense rules do you know? 10, 20, 50? If you know the 100 tense rules in this video, your English is incredible. We're going to start with the basic rules, go through them quickly, and then look at the advanced English grammar rules for English tenses. Let's start with the present simple and the basic uses. We can use the present simple for facts. Pandas live in China. Also for truths. It is good to be kind. And for descriptions that are true now. I have grey hair, the man in this picture might say. Also for present habits. Are there things which you just find yourself doing again and again? For example, I always check my phone when I wake up. For present routines, use the present simple. That's something that happens at the same time over and over again. For example, I brush my teeth every morning. And for timetables, use the present simple. If you're looking at this timetable and you want to describe it, you could say a bus departs every 8 minutes on Saturdays. But now let's look at the advanced uses of the present simple. You can use the present simple to describe future time in subordinate clauses. Look at the example. Give me a call when you leave. This is what the man in the picture is probably saying to the woman. There are two clauses here. Give me a call is the first clause, and when you leave is the second clause. When you leave is describing a situation in the future. Now, we don't use other words to indicate the future here, such as will or going to. It's just a subordinate clause where we have the subordinator when followed by you leave, present simple. So this can be used to indicate future time. Also, instructions without an imperative. For example, here you're telling someone how to perhaps make some bread or a cake. You could say this. First you add milk, then you mix in some flour. You're making it slightly less direct. The imperative is more of a command rather than simply sharing with someone. So you could prefer to use the present simple here. You could also use the present simple to make correspondence more formal. Instead of saying, I am writing to you, make it even more formal by using the simple form. We write to advise you of our new range of cars. The present simple is also used in permanent situations. The River Nile flows into the Mediterranean Sea. It's always happened. It's always going to happen. It's permanent. Use the present simple. And with state verbs, we use the present simple. For instance, in this video here, you can see castle. If someone is looking from the position where the video is taken, they might say, I see a castle in the distance. Now let's move on to the present continuous. Starting again with the basic uses. A basic use of the present continuous is to indicate present activities. Look at this baby. What is this baby doing right now? The baby is sleeping. This is not something that just happens in a moment. This has probably happened for many hours before and will continue afterwards. It's an activity in progress. The baby is sleeping. For activities close to the present time, we will use the present continuous as well. People are getting excited about the band's reunion. Now, that might not mean right now. It could be around now, before and after. But the general situation is around now. So use the present continuous. The present continuous is used for repeated actions. This girl plays the piano over and over and over again. So use the present continuous to emphasize that it's a repeated action. She is practicing the tune until she gets it right. One activity, then the same activity, then the same activity over and over again. For future arrangements, we might use the present continuous. They are meeting outside the cafe at 7 p.m. It was planned before, and now we're describing this arrangement by using the present continuous. But there are advanced uses of the present continuous too. Temporary situations can use the present continuous. I am staying at a hotel at the moment, but next week I'll move into an apartment. So to emphasize the fact that staying at a hotel is temporary, use the present continuous. Also for changes in general. The amount of traffic on the roads is constantly increasing. So to indicate a change is happening in something, particularly with words such as increase or decrease, use the present continuous. The present continuous can be used for an activity that is usually in progress at a particular time. This lady is walking her dog. And she says this, I'm usually walking the dog when the rest of my family wake up. Let's unpick this. Her family wakes up at a particular time every day, and she is doing the same activity every day at exactly the same time that her family wake up. So it's kind of like a routine, but the routine is for an activity to be in progress at a particular time. If we are talking about behavior that people have in the present, we will often use the continuous form with the verb to be. I am being, you are being, you're being. You're being too loud, keep quiet, means the present behavior is too loud. So use the present continuous to describe it in that way. Now let's look at differences between the present simple and the present continuous and when you would choose between the two. Firstly, physical feelings. Either can be used in most situations. I feel unwell, I'm feeling unwell are both possible in this situation. The historical present is when we describe a story that happened in the past, but use present tenses to make the listener or reader feel closer to it. But which tenses would we use? Well, if we're giving background information, we're likely to use the present continuous. Here's what happened. It's raining hard. People are running to get under cover. So this is not the actual story. This is just what's happening in the background around it. And the present continuous can be used if we're using the historical present. But if we're using simple forms, we're trying to make progress in the story. So I run into a shop. The shopkeeper asks me why I'm here. I tell him. One after the other after the other. So if we're trying to make progress in time in the story, the present simple would be preferred if we're using the historical present. What about using here or there with present situations? Usually we'd use the simple tense here. Here is the key to the house. There comes the bus. Not there is coming the bus, but just there comes the bus. And if you're showing annoyance at bad habits, you could use either form. She's always leaving the lights on. Present continuous. He constantly snores in bed. Present simple. Have you received an invitation to an event such as a wedding? Often we'll use this form, are to or is to. The verb to be in the simple form followed by to. And this is useful for official announcements. We are to get married next year. The are to form, be followed by to, makes it more official. If you want to show emphasis on something, then you can use the simple tenses with do. I do enjoy watching TV. Here you need to stress the word do. Or in the continuous form, stress am. I am trying my best. However, you can stress any word you want in a sentence to draw attention to it. And you can find out more about any of these tenses on my course Perfect English Grammar. There's a link in the description below if you're interested. Let's move on to the past simple and the past continuous then. First of all, the past simple and looking at the basic uses. The past simple is predominantly used for finished actions. I applied for the vacancy. Or for finished states. I was nervous while I waited for the response. It's a state. It's how the person felt at that time. And for past facts. The company I wanted to work for was the best in the world. It was true in the past. We don't know if it's true now, but because it was a fact in the past, we use the past simple. Also, past descriptions. Look at this well-dressed man. He might say this: I was well dressed on the day of the interview. The past simple describes how he looked at that time. And if with past habits, use the past simple again. When I didn't have a job, I always applied for new vacancies on Mondays. It was the same every Monday. We can use the past simple. We may also be able to use used to or would for some situations when we describe past habits, but the past simple is also commonly used. Let's look at the past continuous basic uses before we go on to advanced uses. The past continuous is used for finished activities. In this picture, I was driving to the interview. Verb to be, then the ing form of the main verb. If you have the longer of two past actions, or if you're interrupting a long action, use the past continuous. I was waiting for the interview to begin when the door opened. Or if you're giving background to a story, use the past continuous. People were talking in the room while I was waiting for the interview to begin. It wasn't the main part of the story. People talking in the room was just something happening around the story. So use the past continuous to show that it's background information. What about the differences between the past simple or continuous? Let's move on to the advanced uses where we choose between them. If you're talking about a past idea that is no longer true, you normally use the simple form. For example, in the past, some scientists believed that the world was flat, but most scientists now believe it is round. So usually the past simple is used here. If you are trying to get the sense across that it was a temporary or an activity for a particular reason, you might choose the past continuous, but the past simple is far more common here. If you're trying to link past events together in a sequence, the past simple is what you need. In the experiment you can see below, they added water, then they mixed it with salt, and finally they boiled the solution. Past simple in a sequence. If you're describing events happening at the same time in the past, you could use the continuous form. 500 years ago, men were trading in marketplaces while women were bringing up children. These things were happening at the same time. Men were trading in marketplaces, women were bringing up children, not one followed by the other, but two events side by side happening together at the same time. For situations that feel more permanent about the past, use the simple form. I lived in Mumbai for the whole of my childhood. It felt permanent to this person because it was the whole of their childhood, so they use the past simple. But if it's a temporary situation in the past, it's common to use the continuous form. I was staying in a hotel while I was looking for a permanent place to live. This is similar to what happens in all tenses. Permanent goes with simple, temporary goes with continuous. If you have a past activity that was often repeated, the continuous form would be preferred here. And we particularly use this with high frequency adverbs such as always. I was always playing in the park in the evenings when I was younger. If you're being hypothetical, even if you're talking about now or the future, you can use past tenses to show you're being hypothetical, that you're not being real, you're just imagining things. And for this, we can use either the past simple or the past continuous, depending on the sentence. Look at the picture. Do you think this could happen to you. Could you travel in this rocket? It's very unlikely. So we would be hypothetical and use past tenses. Suppose you were travelling in a rocket to the moon. How would you feel? Here, past continuous because it's an activity we're imagining. Or if only I knew the answer to this difficult problem. We're imagining it, but we use the past simple. Distancing is a technique we use to be more polite. We create distance in time between us and the person listening to create more space. In other words, to make them feel they have more space to respond and they're not pressured by us. Distance in time can be created by using past tenses instead of present tenses. We can use either the simple or the continuous, but the continuous tends to be more common when we're using verbs for mental activities. I was wondering if you could pass me your map. But simple form is also possible. I thought I might ask you, is that okay? And if we use that as the subject of a sentence in the past, it normally goes with the simple form. I passed my PhD. That seemed impossible a few years ago. Now let's look at the rules for the present perfect. The basic uses of the present perfect include this: recently completed activities. For example, I have just finished a lesson on past tenses. It was completed recently. Also for recently completed states, I have seen the information I need to complete the next task. So seen here is a state verb from to see, often used as a state verb. But perhaps the most important reason why we use the present perfect is this one: speaking about the past from the context of the present. People often get confused with the present perfect. They think it's a past tense, but a clue is in the word present. We stay in the present moment when we use the present perfect. And we talk about past situations, but from the viewpoint of now. We're looking back to them from now, keeping in present time. So when I say I have watched hundreds of videos on YouTube, when did I watch them? In the past. But what's the time period? Well, it's up to now and including now. It's the situation I am in now. This is all of my experience of watching YouTube videos that I've collected and I possess now in my memory. Everything from the past up to the present. And that captures the essence of what the present perfect is. Now let's look at whether you use the simple form or the continuous form. And this is where it gets more advanced. Firstly, when we focus on an activity, we usually use the continuous form. I have been writing an email. Let's look at the next one before we compare them together. If we focus on completion of an event, we use the simple form. I have written an email and now I am going to send it. We're talking about the same activity, but we're focusing on different things. If I say I have been writing, I'm interested in the process of writing. If I say I have written an email, I'm interested in the fact that an activity took place and the activity is complete in itself. If we focus on something being permanent, we normally use the simple form. For example, I have owned this toy since I was a child. But if we focus on something being temporary, we use the continuous form. I have been wearing this hat because the sun is too hot, but I will take it off this evening. Once again, we see how the simple goes with the permanent, the temporary goes with the continuous forms. Sometimes we have special phrases that have particular tenses that go with them. This is the, with an ordinal, is one of them. This is the first time I have tried chocolate ice cream. If we have this is the followed by a number and then a word like time or instance, then follow it with the simple form. I have tried. If we're maintaining present time whilst introducing past events, either could be used. Have a look at the example here. Here's someone helping an injured woman. Now perhaps the ambulance has arrived, and what does he tell the people in the ambulance? What have I done so far? I've helped the injured woman. Simple. And I've been doing my best to help the injured woman. Continuous. Now the ambulance is here. See the present context. How long an activity has taken until now is commonly with the continuous form. I've been trying to get your attention for ages. For ages means from a time in the past until now. Another area where confusion happens is when you're choosing between the past simple and the present perfect. Let's look at that now. The present perfect is common with already, just, or yet. Look at the example sentences here. I have already been told about the meeting. I have just been to the meeting. I haven't tried the suggestions yet. So is that the rule or not? Well, there's more to the story here. And if you've learned American versions of English, you may be familiar with what comes next. Because in some varieties of English, the past simple is common with these words. I already knew about it. I just went there. I didn't try that yet. So sometimes the use of the present perfect or the past simple depends upon where in the world you are. My version of English is British English, and that's like the top half of this page, but American English sometimes is like the bottom half. Commonly, news reports start with the present perfect to give general information, but switch to the past simple for more specific information. Look at this. A criminal has been arrested in the town centre. He stole several bags of sausages from a shop. So to start general, the present perfect fits because we're talking very generally about an event and we're not being specific about the time. An event happened in the past at any time in the past. Having introduced the information to the reader or listener, we then go in for the specific details. And because when we're being more specific, we're focusing on particular activities that happened at a particular time, then moving into the past simple is quite common. Okay, now on to the past perfect. The past perfect tends to be more advanced. It's harder for people to learn. Let's look at some of the ways we use it and then compare it to simple and continuous forms. The general use of the past perfect is to make it clear which event happened first and when events are not in order. For instance, I was wearing a plaster because I had fallen over and cut myself earlier in the day. If you're repeating events before a point in the past, you'll also use the past perfect. He got top marks in the exam. What happened before? He had been studying every day for the previous month. So let's think about this a bit more. First of all, the time of the story is he got top marks in the exam. Why? Because of something that happened before. He had been studying, but the frequency was every day. It was a repeated activity that happened over and over again before this point in the past. Let's go back to the first example again. Why did we use I had fallen over? Well, because I fell over before I wore the plaster. The time of the story is wearing the plaster. But then we go backwards in time. And to show we've gone backwards in time, use the past perfect. If I said, because I fell over, it sounds as if it happens afterwards, which isn't correct, because the past simple takes events forward, but the past perfect takes events back. If you're being hypothetical about the past, you can also use the past perfect. If I had run faster, I would have arrived on time. So by saying if I had run, I'm thinking about a past event, but I'm imagining what a situation could have been like if things had been different. Events immediately before another in the past would also typically use the past perfect. They had just finished preparing for the party when the first guest arrived. So what's special about this? It's something that happened immediately before another. Notice the events are in the correct order here. But by using the past perfect, we emphasize the fact that it came before another and just before. It's something that we often do, even with events in the right order. Reporting speech in the past will take the past perfect in many situations. What do we mean by reporting speech? Well, we hear something and then we tell someone else. And if it was something in the past, then we'll use the past perfect when we report it. When they asked me about the preparations, I told them I had been preparing all day. Not I prepared all day. Sometimes we can use the past simple when we report, but commonly we'll use the past perfect when we report something that's already in the past. If there are intentions or wishes that did not happen, the past perfect is often used to show this. It's kind of another hypothetical situation. I had planned to make a cake, but I ran out of time. Did it happen? No. So it's hypothetical. Now, when would we use the simple form or the continuous form? There are many reasons why, but here's a summary of the key ones. Activities up to a point in the past could go with either, depending on the situation or which verb you're using. Is it a state or active verb? Look at the workers here. Perhaps their factory has closed down. You could say this: the last workers left the factory last year. They had been working there for the previous 20 years. But you could equally have said they had worked there for 20 years. Let's go back to a theme we've looked at before in this video: temporary situations. And we can use the past perfect continuous for temporary situations up to a point in the past. The crowd had been waiting to see the king. Then he arrived. With states up to a point in the past, usually simple, as we mentioned a few moments ago. The surprise party happened yesterday. Most of the guests had known about it for a number of months. So know is a state verb, so use the simple. But sometimes we have to decide whether we're using the past perfect or the past simple. Here's a way to decide. If the events are in time order, we'll usually use the past simple. Look at the lady here. We opened the door, got out of the car, and walked into the mall. That's what she's about to do. So that's the normal way that we use the past simple when events are in time order. I've shown you some exceptions to that in the previous points where you can use the past perfect and events are still in order, but generally when events are in time order, we use the past simple. But when events are not in time order, we use the past perfect. We walked into the mall. We had already got out of the car. So the second event happened before the first, so we use the past perfect to show that the second event came first, and we're not using the normal sequence of events that we would with the past simple. If you're using the past perfect followed by a clause with a subordinator, then you normally don't need to use the past perfect again, particularly with reason clauses. I had left my phone at home because my mother needed it, not because my mother had needed it. If we say because my mother had needed it, we're suggesting that she needed it before I'd left my phone at home, which isn't the case. The two things happened at the same time. So we don't use the past perfect twice here. But if it's followed by a coordinator and a clause, then we will. I had left my phone at home, but I had brought my laptop. So here, and or but or, we can use the past perfect again in the second clause. Now, this does not mean that we ignore rules to do with omissions or to do with lists. Sometimes when we have a list, we can cut out the grammar if the grammar is repeated in a sequence. Look at the example below. I had cooked and cleaned all morning. So here the use of and takes cleaned and applies had to the cleaned as well as had to the cooked. It's what we can do in lists. If there's symmetry in the list, we can cut out extra grammatical words in the second or third part of the list. Let's move on to looking at future time. First of all, with will. There are many basic uses of will. When you have expectations for the future, you can use will. They will be here at 6 p.m. They always arrive then. With certainty about the future, we often use will. Nothing will stop the rain from falling. There's a certainty in your voice. Also for promises and offers. I will buy you an ice cream if you do your homework. It's a promise. When you give consent to people, then we can use will. It's saying you're allowed to do something after this point. They will let you into the country with a passport is a very common way of giving consent and using will for the future. Plans made in the moment. We often use will or the short form, which is apostrophe LL, to describe this. Look at the man here. He's on the phone. Why? Because someone has asked him what's the solution. And he replies, I'll call my friend. She'll know. So when we say, I'll call my friend, he's deciding what to do in the moment. I'll is short for I will. So when we make plans in that moment and we describe plans as we're going through the thought process, use will. If you make a prediction but you don't have the physical evidence, you're much more likely to use will. Here's someone's thinking about rain, but they don't have evidence. They just say this: I think it will rain later. It can't stay sunny forever. They're predicting it, but they don't really have evidence, so will makes more sense here. Let's look at the advanced uses of will now. Orders use will if it's an order for the present or the future. You will obey me, this man is thinking. It's an order, and will emphasizes the order. Threats also go with will. Let's expand this sentence. You will obey me or there will be consequences. So will suggests the threat coming afterwards. But will is also used to refuse these orders and threats. They will not or they won't obey you unless you offer them something in return. The future is also made with going to. Here are some basic uses of going to. When plans are already made and you're simply restating a plan you've already made, now use going to. Why are you picking up the phone this time? I'm going to call my friend. But in this case, the person didn't decide on the spot. They decided before. And if you do have physical evidence for a future prediction, use going to instead of will. It's going to rain. Dark clouds are coming towards us. I have evidence. I have more certainty. So going to shows that extra certainty. Going to usually makes the future more concrete, more set in stone and fixed. Future arrangements also can use going to. We're going to Dallas at the weekend. The trip has been planned for weeks. Now, sometimes you have to choose between going to or the present continuous. Can we use both for future arrangements without a change in meaning? Well, often yes, but here are some things to be aware of. Firstly, let's go back to restating previous decisions. We'd usually use going to here and not the present continuous. What are your plans for the future? I've already thought about what to do. I'm going to start a new course. So here we're restating a previous decision. With fixed arrangements, we usually use the present continuous. What are your plans for next week? I'm starting a new course on Monday. Do you see the difference between the two? With a fixed arrangement, I'm starting a new course on Monday. I am stating my plans. But with the one before, restating previous decisions, I'm restating something that I thought about. And that's led to particular action. It's not so much an arrangement, it's a statement of a decision. So that's often how you distinguish between the two. Decisions go with the going to, and arrangements with the present continuous. Now, there can be some overlap. Going to can also be used for fixed arrangements because they are fixed decisions as well. When we go to state verbs, use going to as well. Don't use the present continuous. What are you doing later? We're going to hear a speech, not we're hearing a speech. That wouldn't fit because the present continuous doesn't normally go with state verbs unless there are other special rules. There are other ways of expressing the future too, such as the future perfect, and these would all be considered advanced uses. First of all, completion of something by a known future time. Normally, we'd use the simple form here, and we would say this: by the end of the year, I'll have taken my IELTS examination. So here we're anticipating taking the IELTS exam, and it's in a time period between now and another stated time period. In this case, by the end of the year. It could happen at any time between those points in time, now and the end of the year. I'll have taken. If you're referring to an activity that's ongoing up to a point in the future, particularly when you use for or since or words like that that express a duration of time, it's common to use the future perfect continuous. For example, by the end of the year, I'll have been studying English for 10 years. I wonder what you would say if you put your own experience in that place. Anticipating what is true without physical evidence: will have finished. I want to return to Dubai. They will have finished building the tallest skyscraper in the world by now. So here, this is one way in which we can use the future perfect. It could potentially be simple or continuous here, depending on the context. But that's one reason why we use it, anticipating what is true without physical evidence. Here, you're just imagining it. You've not seen it for yourself. You're just imagining that this will be true. If you're anticipating what someone knows, you can also use the future perfect. And in both of these cases, the example about Dubai and the next example, we're actually talking about present time, not future time at all. Here we're using the future perfect for present time. Let's look at the example to do with the picture below. You can see two cars crashing together. I'm sure you will have seen the news about the crash on the motorway. It was reported on every channel yesterday. So here we're referring to knowledge that someone has in the present, and more than that, knowledge about something in the present that's based on something that happened in the past, a little bit like the present perfect. But we use will have seen to anticipate what we think someone knows. Will have to is a similar structure but works slightly differently. Will have to refers to something necessary after the present time. Look at the example. The museum is closed today. We will have to come again tomorrow. So it is necessary for us to come again tomorrow, something necessary after the present time. Let's move on to the future continuous now. The future continuous is made up of will, the verb to be, then the main verb with ing. And we use this for predicting future activities. Perhaps you know that you're going to be like this person in the picture tomorrow. So you need to tell other people, I can't see you tomorrow. I will be working all day. I'm predicting a future activity, and so I use the future continuous form, will be working. Also for predicting future responses. He'll be complaining about that, I'm sure. So here I'm anticipating what the person thinks about working all day tomorrow. And I think he will be complaining about that. Not just once, but on and on and on and on. An activity that's ongoing, but it's a response. Also, guessing activities happening now. Why are they working late? They'll be making plans for tomorrow, I imagine. I don't know it's happening, but I'm guessing that this is what is happening now, somewhere else where I'm not. And the future continuous will be helpful for that. In this case, again, it's to do with present usage. Okay, we're nearly at the end, but we have a little bit left to do yet. Next, it's future in the past. First of all, we can use would followed by infinitive for an event happening after the time in a story. Here's a man who's got a clock in his bed. Why is that? Well, let's look at the story and then let's think about what it means. People were celebrating that night, but they would stay in bed for a long time the next morning. So the time of the story is the first part. People were celebrating that night. When we use would here, we're taking the position of time in that story and imagining the future after the point in time of that story, predicting the future from a point in time in the past in storytelling. It's kind of like giving a preview to someone when you're telling a story. You're previewing the next part. So people were celebrating that night, but they would stay in bed. That is what is coming next in the story. We can also use was going to for plans after the time in the story. For instance, we ironed our suits because we were going to visit a special event later that day. It was a plan that was in the future at that particular point, at the moment when we ironed our suits. But was going to is often used in another way as well. And this is for past plans that did not actually happen. Look at this poor lady. She has a problem. What is it? We were going to drive to the sea, but our car broke down. We can also use the past continuous for future in the past. This is when we have arrangements after a time in the story, similar to how we use the present continuous for arrangements after now. The past continuous is for arrangements after a past point. For instance, they couldn't get to sleep that night because they were meeting the king the following morning and they were nervous. So the arrangement is meeting, and it was going to happen after the point of the story, basically when they were trying to get to sleep. And finally, conditionals. Conditionals use tenses in different ways for different purposes. Here are the basic uses, which generally include the first conditional. The main reason for using the first conditional is to say a condition. If a condition is met, there will be a present or future consequence. For instance, if I earn enough money, I'll buy a new car. So the present simple is in the first part. The condition, if I earn, and will is in the second part, the present or future consequence. I'll buy a new car. But we can sometimes use will in both clauses, where one condition requires another condition. If you will work for me, I'll help you get a new car. Basically, you do this, I'll do that. Two conditions at the same time, where one condition depends upon another condition. Moving on to more advanced uses, the second conditional is for unreal situations with an imagined outcome. It's using the past simple, but it's actually to do with now, or perhaps in the future. If I owned a car, I would drive wherever I wanted. Do I own a car? No, it's unreal. What would be the imagined outcome? I would drive wherever I wanted. The past simple for an unreal situation to do with the present. As we've mentioned before, we turn the present into the past to make things unreal about the present. The third conditional uses the past perfect. Again, this is for an unreal situation, but this time not an unreal present situation, but an unreal past situation. If I had warned the driver that another car was in the middle of the road, there wouldn't have been an accident. And lastly, the zero conditional. Here we use the present tense in both clauses, where we're simply presenting a general cause and effect rule. When you heat water to 100 degrees centigrade, it boils. It's a general rule. Do this and that will always happen.